once again. This is the reappearance of Atheist Pastor. He's recovered, I'm pleased to announce, and he's back raring to go with his takedown of Brian Edwards' Archeological Evidence for the Bible. Here he is. Hello, Chris.
G'day. How are we? I hope everyone out there is good. Apologies, I missed last week, but I've got a confession to make, John.
What's that?
A confession to make. Well, what actually happened was I think I angered the Lord, and he afflicted me with something, and it caused me to not be able to show up last week. Fortunately, I prayed, and I got a lot of people around me praying. And miraculously, well, either through prayer or the medication, I'm not too sure which one. I've recovered completely. Yeah, probably the prayer. I mean, that makes more sense, I think.
Did you have a big finger come down from the clouds and point at you, and inflict you with?
He is so angry at me that he just zapped me from a distance. He wouldn't even come and see me. He's really upset that I've been telling people that our good friend Brian might be not quite too accurate with his historical knowledge, but I do have something actually that I've further researched from last time. Now, I'm not sure if you remember, we had a and you would have probably just seen it before, but Sargon of Akkad was mentioned, and he was flouting it as this great big evidence. And I said, well, the problem is about a 1600 year difference.
Yes.
Well, what I wasn't taking into account, and what Brian certainly wasn't taking into account, was Sargon II, who was around about 700 BCE. So Sargon II was actually contemporary to the writers of the Bible, but it's not the same one that he was showing archaeological evidence for. So it was a different Sargon.
The mystery of the two Sargons. Yeah.
Yes. So just like you've got a lot of we've had two Queen Elizabeths, I guess, so we can have two King Sargons.
Why not? Why not, indeed? So just for the benefit of our audience, last week when you were off sick, I showed the interview between you and I in which you explained why you are called the Atheist Pastor. So if anybody's wondering how you come up with a name like that, just look at last week's show and it will all be explained. So where do you think we got to with Brian? What was the nature of our disagreement with him?
Well, mainly he was twisting a lot of evidence, I guess, that was out there, and he was claiming a lot of things. I think for his audience, and look, you would assume his audience doesn't have a historical knowledge, or as most people don't. I mean, it's just like I couldn't argue on science or philosophy because I'm a historian. A lot of people don't have a good basis for historical knowledge, especially history from another continent, thousands of years previously. So, but what he was doing was he was just nitpicking the evidence to suit the narrative he was trying to put out, and a lot of it, and I guess that Sargon example is an example of that. And also some of the things that he was talking about where there's a complete lack of evidence, things like claiming that there was a global flood because other places have spoken about a flood. Well, there's cultures throughout the world who have spoken about drought because droughts happen, floods happen, natural disasters happen, lightning happens. Just because a Greek saw lightning doesn't mean that because someone in China saw lightning that it's evidence for Zeus.
Absolutely. And so my grievance with him was that he was claiming that locations are somehow proof of what happened in his narrative. And I think you use the expression Spider-Man of New York in that connection.
Well, that's a good one. But even I mean, we can look at even more, I guess a few different examples. We can look at, we know that certain areas in the US exist that are mentioned in the Book of Mormon. So was Joseph Smith correct? We know that there are volcanoes on the Hawaiian Islands. So does that mean that the Scientologists are correct, and that's where Lord Zunu put all the alien ghosts? All those millions of years ago before he wound up in galactic jail. Where do we draw the line with that kind of stuff? I mean, look, sometimes it's you can use something like the Bible as a source. There's no question about that, especially where it's contemporary. I mean, where they're talking about things like the Babylonian exile, even people like kings like Nebuchadnezzar, Cyrus. They were contemporary to the writers, so certainly we can use those for history. But the problem is, it's everything that happens before that it just gets so dramatically wrong. And even in the New Testament, there are some standout errors that we know just don't add up. But they juggle things and the facts. But no, location does not prove history.
And it's inconsistencies too, isn't it? Particularly in the New Testament.
Exactly. And I mean, to get to it as well, in Mount Olympus, we know Mount Olympus exists, which is the Greek pantheon, therefore exists. We know that places like Corinth exists. But that doesn't then prove that everything that was written in the letters to the Corinthians is accurate. It's even we can look at things that have been edited over the years, like Josephus.
Yes.
I think the forgery of Josephus is a fairly obvious one, and even Christian scholars will agree to that now. But look, with history, you always have to approach it with a skeptic's mind. You've always got to say, okay, well, what's the context it was written in? Who was it written by? Who was it written for? Is it an eyewitness account? Is it a retelling of a story? Is it passed down knowledge? How reliable is this source? Even in modern times, I mean, it's a great example is if you look at the Roswell crash, the UFO crash, you can find a newspaper saying flying saucer captured from only, what is it now, about 70 years ago, 80 years ago. But that doesn't actually mean that a flying saucer was captured. But that was certainly what was written. I mean, you can pick up, two different newspapers, and depending on which way they lean, they will tell you either the leader of your country is the greatest thing since sliced bread, or the devil incarnate. And that also happened historically. There was people who wrote these things had opinions. A lot of the time where there was nationalistic pride attached to it. Characters say like King David, for instance. It's the evidence would indicate that he was probably a minor, like a regional ruler, but because at the time they were trying to get a lot of nationalistic pride as they were going back to their, out of exile, back to their homeland, they build these characters up. They build them up, and I think even like the Americans do with, say, a George Washington, they've probably would build him up to be greater than he was. Apologies to any Americans out there. Don't mean to offend, but that's an example, that can be used there.
Yeah. Well, 40 years ago today, John Lennon was shot, and he immediately became something like a saint. But he was a very mixed man. He admitted abusing women, for example, but that's all quietly forgotten, and he's elevated now. So, in the absence of corroborating independent sources, which the Bible sadly lacks, what we're left with is a narrative, and I contend that narrative is not evidence, unless you take the story of the emperor's new clothes as evidential.
Oh, and what a great example that is, because there's plenty of places in the Bible where they say, well, only a fool won't believe. It's just like, this is the emperor's new clothes, if there ever was.
Yes. So it's location is not evidence, it's mismatch of dates, its narrative is not evidence, it's inconsistencies, it's no lack of corroborating independent sources. Let's take a look at him now and see.
I'll throw one more in there as well.
Yeah.
And I'm still yet to make my mind up, but he is either extremely inept or he is extremely dishonest.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It is one of the two. It is absolutely one of the two. His
historical. Should we get
historical knowledge is terrible. Let's do it.
Yeah. Taking him down a bit more and see how he turns out today.
Sure, I'm sure he won't let us down at all.
To believe that maybe there never was a place because, you got it, it was only found in the Bible. Well, the problem was compounded because two little prophets in the Bible, Nahum, he's very small, you'll find him, I promise you he's there, and Zephaniah, he's there as well, he's a bit bigger, but you'll find him. They prophesied of Nineveh. Nahum said, Nahum 3:15, their fire will devour you. And Zephaniah, God said Nineveh would be made a desolation, a dry waste like the desert. And that is exactly what happened. And we now know that because when Nineveh was eventually discovered in 1847 by...
Something I'll jump in here with, because he's talking about prophecy. Let's go to Ezekiel 26, where they talk about, Tyre, the city of Tyre. It will be destroyed and never stand. I can't remember the exact words. I'm not particularly inclined to go and read the Bible to get the exact. But the gist of it is that many nations will attack, and the sea will wash over it, and it will never be seen again. Unfortunately for Ezekiel, today you can go and visit Tyre in Lebanon. It's still there. So, when you keep saying, "Oh, this city will be destroyed, that city will be destroyed," and all these cities will be destroyed, eventually you're probably going to hit one or two. But the other thing too is, the amount of cities that have been destroyed, and the sites of great empires that have been destroyed. It's Sargon of Acadia was massive.
Yes.
But is no longer there. Babylon. Yeah. Babylon was one of the greatest cities. Sparta. Yeah. Sparta's gone.
Yes.
Carthage.
Yes.
The list goes on. So I take this with a grain of salt.
What he's doing there is cherry picking.
Yes, absolutely.
That's another crime to put on the list.
He's going to be found guilty of a lot of things, I think. But it's once again, it's, if he was to be honest, he would talk about these things and he would approach it in that manner. It doesn't mean that it potentially wouldn't be a prophecy by his standards, or certainly his audience's standards. But when you've got a cherry pick, when you've got a dart around the truth, I question the motives, and I question the actual the belief, and certainly the integrity in the belief.
Yes. Is he honourable or not?
Well, that's the $1 million question, I think, or in this case, the $10 question, because that's what we paid for this.
Or is it shekels, maybe?
Austin Henry Laird, an English archaeologist, the whole city came to life. And the burnt walls, fire-blackened walls, you can see right there in front of you, where the scorching of the walls and the intense heat. And that's exactly
fire
what
in
happened
a destroyed
in 612
city.
BC. And the Babylonians actually destroyed the city and wreaked revenge, because earlier the Assyrians had been to Babylon and had done the same thing to them. So it was payback time to Assyria, making Nineveh a desolation, a dry waste in the desert. And the whole city disappeared under the desert floor until in 1847 it was discovered. And when it was discovered, it made news, international news, because a biblical story was literally coming out of the ground. Well, let's go and look at that story just for a moment. You remember the guy who was chatting?
I bet America didn't hear about it.
No, I'd imagine not. One other thing too, and I just quickly looked this up. Zephaniah mightn't have been a prophet. I've just looked up, and the dating of Zephaniah is the 7th century BC. He could have just been reporting on a current event. That's why I thought when he said the 7th century BC, hang on a second, that doesn't sound quite right to me. Zephaniah, it speaks about the reign of Haziah, who reigned from 640 to 609. So that's contemporary. And what year did our friend just say that? I'm just going to go back a second here, because I think I might have caught him out in a little bit of a 612. Okay, so a book that was written between 609 and 640 BC, talking about something that happened in 612. That's not prophetic, that's reporting.
Yes, indeed.
But once again, he's playing that for his audience. And if he's a biblical scholar, surely he'd know. I mean, I've got a layman's understanding of that. And I sort of went, hang on, let me just use the power of Google here. But and obviously I would like to just confirm that and when things were written. But I mean, it's not necessarily, it's taking a leap to say that it's prophetic.
Yep.
Isolation, a dry waste in the desert, and the whole city disappeared under the desert floor until in 1847 it was discovered. And when it was discovered, it made news, international news, because a biblical story was literally coming out of the ground. Well, let's go and look at that story just for a moment. You remember the guy who was chatting with his dad earlier? Sargon on the left and Sennacherib on the right. Sennacherib, on his father's death, took over the power of the kingdom.
Whoa.
And the very first thing he did was...
Hang on. So he was arguing earlier in this video when they found Akkad, which was from 2,200 years ago, and that was Sargon. But now he's saying that Sennacherib, who is the son of Sargon II, was around in 701 BCE. Is he saying that Sargon lived for 1,500 years?
Well, we know that, who was it did? Come on, brain cell. You know, who's famous biblical longevity man?
Methuselah.
That's the one, yes. So we know it's possible.
Well, okay, that's true. This is true. But actually, I think what we can see here is I think there's a little bit of I think we've picked up on either he didn't realize that the ruins of Akkad or Arcadia were from 2,300 BCE, or he just kind of chose to ignore that. So this is where I'm getting down to incompetence and integrity being the two questions here. So sorry, I just got a bit excited when I saw that. Doesn't take a lot, let me assure you.
And Sennacherib on the right. Sennacherib, on his father's death, took over the power of the kingdom, and the very first thing he did was want to collect rent from all the subject nations that should have been paying him. This is all written in the Bible, and it's all written in Sennacherib's records as well. In fact, this is not a Bible text. This is Sennacherib's record himself. He says he took his army through the land of Judea, and as to Hezekiah the Jew, incidentally, this is one of many times when pagan kings refer to Jewish kings in the right place at the right spot, and Jewish kings are referring to pagan kings in the right place at the right spot. As to Hezekiah the Jew, I laid siege to 46 of his strong cities, walled forts, and to countless small villages in their vicinity. So he trundled his massive, brutal Assyrian army through the land, smashing, destroying, plundering, burning all through the land, 46 of his strong cities and walled forts and the land around them. It was a devastating time, and Hezekiah is holed up in Jerusalem. And then Sennacherib came to the walls of Lachish. Lachish is the second most significant, most powerful city and the most well-defended city of all. And eventually it fell. And when he went back to Nineveh, Sennacherib decorated his victory wall, not with Jerusalem, but with Lachish, 61 feet of
Once again, it's
wall
contemporary.
panels.
So proves
And
nothing.
it was when Austin Henry Laird discovered it in 1847, as I say, it made international news because here was a battle from the beginning to the end put out for us all to see. It's now how we know what ancient warfare was like. And you can see the battering ram. I'd love to talk to you more about that battering ram, but I haven't got time. But this is how we know what battering rams were like in the ancient world. And down on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see people. It's an early form of crucifixion. The Assyrians would put a stake through a man's stomach or his groin and leave him to die. And all through this tremendous panel, all the way around until you have people right at the end, some of the leaders being spread out and literally flayed alive, with the children being made to watch. And it's quite significant that I'm not showing you a picture of that, but you can see children escaping with their parents, even in the one in front of you there. It's a biblical battle that's coming right out of the ground. And right at the end, you have the king sitting on his throne receiving the booty. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, besieging with all his forces. Meanwhile, back in Jerusalem, Hezekiah had 3 or 4 years of warning that the army was on the way. It took time for the army to get through the land and do all this destructive work and lay siege to Lachish. And so he had time. And one of the things he had to do was deny water to the enemy, but make sure that Jerusalem was well supplied. So the Bible makes a very simple comment. It says that actually what he did was to channel water through the city down to the west side of the city of David with a conduit, a tunnel, which brought water into the city. How many of you here this evening have ever walked through Hezekiah's tunnel in Jerusalem? 1, 2, 3, 4, about 2, 3, 4 of you. Yeah, okay. It's something that's quite incredible to do. You can actually walk through the tunnel that Hezekiah's engineers built, and no engineer
once again, this is all
today knows how
contemporary.
they
I
did it.
mean,
they started at both ends.
so what?
All they have is a little pick in one hand and an oil lamp in the other. We know they started at both ends because when they met in the middle, they left a plaque on the wall that told us exactly how they met. And they wind under the city, 49 meters down, 533 meters wiggling through, and the gradient is just less than 1%, just a gentle gradient, so the water keeps flowing, and it ends up in the pool of Siloam, which was only discovered, the real pool of Siloam, only discovered in the year 2004. And the prophet Isaiah, who was the in-house prophet at that time, had prophesied, "Thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, or shoot an arrow there, or come through to it before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mound against it." And that is exactly what happened. If you know your biblical story there, you know that the record makes it absolutely clear that...
Is it really prophecy when you say, we're not going to let the enemy in, we're going to beat them, we're going to win? I mean, if you can find me anyone who has ever throughout history said, well, we're at war and I'm pretty sure we're going to get smashed, they're going to come in, they're going to absolutely destroy us, and it's going to be horrific, but we'll give it our best. I mean, no, of course not. Everyone claims victory. I mean, it's like Donald Trump saying we're going to build a wall and we're going to stop all these people from getting in. It ain't prophetic.
No, it's not a prophecy, it's a pep talk.
Exactly. It's once again, and it's contemporary. I mean, there's no arguing that there are historical facts in the Bible. I mean, certainly you can use it as a primary source in the case of of a number of things, historical events. But we can use Herodotus as well. I mean, and Herodotus will talk about how the gods blessed and did this and did that, but it doesn't mean that the Greek pantheon's correct. This is the frustrating thing. It's just because certain events were reported accurately at the time does not mean that the one true God of all the universe is the God of the Bronze Age Hebrews.
No.
On the third planet from the sun in this solar system, on the far reaches of the galaxy. It's ridiculous. But anyway,
You could do the same for the Hindu pantheon too, couldn't you? I mean, you could point to events that happened historically in India and say, therefore Ganesh must be real.
Well, you know what? We know the Indus River exists, so therefore,
yes,
Vishnu. It's pick one, anyone. Anyway, we'll see. It's a lot of nothing. It's a lot of contemporary. This isn't. And see, what I noticed he did at the start was he was talking about the prophets, and he's making out as if this was some great prophecy that was told hundreds of years earlier and came true. That's not the case. This is not prophetic. This is contemporary. It's like me walking outside and telling you what happened in my hometown. If they dig up my hometown 2,000 years later, it doesn't mean that I was a prophet because my hometown existed. No. It's a ridiculous assertion, but anyway, let's see what he comes up with next.
Overnight, the army was decimated by an unseen hand, and he had to go back to Syria, where a few years later he was assassinated by two of his own sons, and the Bible actually gives the name of those two sons, one of which has been identified in Assyrian and Babylonian records. And the Greeks and the Babylonians both confirm that his army was decimated and he had to return home. They give a different reason for it. Herodotus, the Greek historian, says that mice ate all the bowstrings so that they couldn't do any more fighting. There is a biblical account that is more accurate than that, and you can go read it for yourself.
I like that he says there's a biblical account that's more accurate than that. How would he know? I mean, Herodotus is the father of history. I mean, I can assure you there is more accuracy in the histories of Herodotus than there is in the Bible, by a long shot. There's even less, heavenly woo in Herodotus. He mentions the Greek pantheon a few times, but I mean, it's one of the best ways to understand and study ancient Greece is you start with Herodotus. That's where you start. So no, the Bible is not more accurate. Well,
I'm adding to the list of indictments here. Unsupported.
Yes. Look, obviously, as a historian, my opinion and my view, and my very, very firm view, is that Herodotus is about 1 million times more accurate than the Bible is, because Herodotus gets pretty much everything right, whereas the Bible gets a few contemporary things right, and is terrible on the histories of it. So we shall continue.
We've got a list here.
Oh, sorry.
We've got a growing list of offences.
Oh, I think part 3 will probably just be the reading of the charges. I think there's that many of them.
The word of God was absolutely true, and this is significant. Sennacherib left a record of all his military campaigns, and in every single military campaign against the surrounding nations, he captured the central city and captured its king, with one single exception, and that was Hezekiah in Jerusalem. And all he can say about Hezekiah in Jerusalem on the Taylor Prism is that he shut up Hezekiah in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. That's true. The problem is he couldn't open the cage and get the bird out. And it really was an admission of defeat, although he didn't look like that. So he went back home, and like Ramesses II with Abel Simnel and his so-called victory over the Hittites, he had to make a wonderful victory over Israel and Judah, and it's the Lachish room that he has to put up. Let's have a look at a few more people confirmed by the spade. Here is one of the great kings of the ancient world. I thought you'd like to see him. Beautiful picture of him, isn't it? Shalmaneser III, king of Assyria. He calls himself the strong man, unsparing. And he tells us what he used to do when he defeated a city. He would make a terrible a heap of skulls outside the city and make the rivers run with blood. And on the stela that you're looking at here, he records the Battle of Karkar in 853 BC. Now, that battle is not recorded in the scriptures. They don't need to record all the battles unless they've got some particular reason. But what's significant is that on the back of this, and if you nip round the back of the screen, you can see it afterwards. If on the back of it, he has a reference to this particular Battle of Karkar. It was some fight. There were 61,000 troops against him, and that included, that was the infantry, and there were 4,000 chariots, and there were 1,900 cavalry and 1,000 camels, and he defeated them. And he says he slaughtered 14,000 of them, and there wasn't room to bury the people. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because he mentions on the back, Ahab, king of Israel, put 10,000 infantry and 2,000 chariots, that's half the chariot force, into this battle. One of many occasions when ancient kings are referring to biblical kings in exactly the right position. And here's another one.
So because someone's name was mentioned, the God of the Bronze Age Israelites is the correct one? Is that what he's saying? Even though the Bible doesn't record it? Like, he's clutching at some straws here. But we know that the Israelites were in the area at the time. I mean, so what?
The whole thing, since the Bible was edited and, how shall we say, perfected at the instigation of Constantine in the 4th century AD, isn't it likely that these accounts were massaged so that the so-called prophecies came to fruition in the later books?
Well, certainly, the prophecies of Jesus, yes. With the historical stuff they're talking about, no, because I guess we've discovered things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and other things that confirm what the writings were, and we're able to date them back to sort of the 6th and 7th century BCE, but certainly there was some things that were in the New Testament that were certainly massaged to fit in with prophecy, rather conveniently. It's like, okay, well, he'll be born in Bethlehem and he'll be a Nazarite. Oh, it just so happens that he's from Nazareth, but he was born in Bethlehem. I promise you, and there was a star in the sky to prove it.
Yes.
Because there's never stars in the sky. I mean, you know.
This is the guy who drove his chariot furiously into Jerusalem, and the end of Jezebel was just on the end of that as well. Now, Jehu was a butcher and a usurper. He'd butchered his way to power, usurped the throne of Israel. He needed a few friends to keep on side. And who better than the big guy himself, Shalmaneser III? So he toddled along to Shalmaneser with a few gifts. And on the black obelisk, it's an obelisk because it's four-sided and it tapers at the top, and it's called a black obelisk because it's black limestone. And on the black obelisk, there is a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kings who are bringing tribute to Shalmaneser III. And the second row down has a kneeling figure there bringing tribute to him. And the text above it, in cuneiform writing, tells us that this is Jehu, son of Omri, bringing tribute to the king. And as you go round the obelisk, you will see all the gifts that he brought.
None of this is unusual for
Ahab,
the era.
Jehu, mentioned very clearly in ancient pagan records.
He's making a tenuous link to his Bible, isn't he?
Sorry?
I said he's just making a tenuous link to his Bible.
Oh, a very tenuous one at that too. Look, it's the and just to give people an understanding, tributes weren't uncommon in this era because there were nations that would have bigger forces, and warfare back then was probably a lot more devastating. Even though the weapons we have now are worse, it was probably a lot more devastating at the time because entire armies would be crossing, destroying, all your food. You couldn't get food, airlifted in by the United Nations in those days. No. If you were fighting a war, it was expensive for one, and a lot of people died both as a result of the war and the aftermath. Not to mention that what would happen is when the soldiers would go into a town and kill all the men and have their way with the women, what you would then get is a generation that weren't pure to that nation. And certainly the way that the kings in particular were treated by some of the conquering forces. No king wanted to be the conquered king. So kings would go and pay tribute. It's just like the mafia, it's they go and give their tribute to the Don. So,
Yes.
As protection, it's almost like a, not so much a vassal state, but not far off it in some circumstances. So this is something that was common all throughout this era in a number of civilizations. I mean, even, you have a look at Alexander the Great as he went a-conquering. That happened.
Yeah. Faced with a choice between death or submission. Let me see now. What shall I go with?
You're either going to completely destroy my civilization and humiliate me and kill everyone I know, or I can bring you a box of gold and kiss your ass for a little bit.
Yes.
It's not really a decision, is it? Certainly in those days where it was a lot more brutal. So,
an Israelite or Judean king, which is not surprising because even at their worst, they obeyed the commandment not to make a graven image of their king. And you might be interested in this. I mentioned earlier the seal impression of what I said was a cylinder seal. Now, these are some seal impressions of the flat seals, if you like, the one carved in stone and slapped onto a piece of clay. And here's a seal impression that has on it Ahaz, king of Judah, and Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. Now, listen. Everything I'm telling you is accepted by the world of archaeology, and this is not denied. They accept this. I can tell you how they found them later on if you want me to. And this
they dug them up.
Jehu or Shebna, the servant of the king. Now, he was the bad boy in the palace. And if you want to know why he was a bad boy in the palace, just read Isaiah 22 and you'll find out. But I love this. You remember Jeremiah? He was the prophet, in-house prophet at the time when the Babylonians were closing in on the city. And whereas Isaiah told the people in the city of Jerusalem, it's okay, God's on your side. He's not going to break in. Sennacherib won't get into this city. Jeremiah, a few centuries later, had a very different message. He said, it's all up. God's finished with you. You might as well surrender now. Now, that didn't go down very well with people trying to defend themselves against the Babylonians. He was the most hated man in the city. And in fact, so hated that you may recall how they dropped him into a well, and it was only an Ethiopian who pulled him out again.
I believe I owe an apology because I said before who actually says that they're about to lose a battle, and apparently Jeremiah did. But when we're comparing Israel to Babylon back then, it's not really prophecy. It'd be like me saying, well, it's if Russia goes to war with Azerbaijan, I think Russia is going to win. It's not really prophecy when it's just, we're talking about the scale of things. Babylon was a phenomenal empire at that period of time. I mean, huge enough that they were able to completely take everyone into captivity. So it's probably a case there of, like we were talking about before, saying, hey, we will lose this, pay the tribute, go and if they want some land, let's work with them, surrender, be a vassal state, whatever we need to do to survive.
Yes, exactly. Well, you've got to know when to capitulate. It happens at the end of a lot of wars, doesn't it? I mean, the Nazis signed the surrender document.
Well, what do they say? You've got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Yes.
Jeremiah was saying it's we don't have a good hand here. It's time to get out.
I thought you were going to break into song for a minute there.
No one wants me to do that. No one.
Conspirators against him was Gedaliah, son of Pasha, and Jehukel, son of Shelemiah. And here's their seals. Nobody doubts that these are the seals of those two guys. But this is the best one. Jeremiah had a scribe, He's the guy who would write down the prophecy that Jeremiah would give. And his name was Baruch or Berechiah. His name appears often in the book of Jeremiah. You'll find it, Baruch, Berechiah. And here is his seal. In fact, there were two seals. The other one, not this one, the other one's got a fingerprint on it. Do you know we might even have the fingerprint of Jeremiah's secretary, Baruch? Now listen, I didn't say we have. I said we could have. It's got to be somebody's thumbprint anyway. But these are evidences of how real these people were. People and events who once never existed.
So he's getting back to that. No one ever said they didn't exist.
Yes.
No one. That was never the consensus. What it was we haven't found the archaeological evidence that they exist. And we're talking about the 18th and 19th century. I mean, we're not talking about modern times. No. It's just like anything. Until you can actually find the evidence of it, well, you have to question whether it's actual historical fact or potentially a story. Now, you can look at the evidence, but no one was denying ever. So he's absolutely being dishonest in that statement. He's being completely dishonest, and I would suggest he knows he's being dishonest.
But I like the way he tried to paint himself as truthful by saying, look, I'm not making a wild claim here. You can trust me.
Oh, yeah. It could be someone's fingerprint on clay. It's like, oh, my goodness. Well, that's evidence that the God of the Bronze Age Hebrews was the one and only true God, a thumbprint.
Yeah. So thumbs existed.
Thumbs existed, and historical figures existed. It's you know what? There's evidence that Joseph Smith existed. The Mormons must be correct.
Yeah, there's a criminal record against him.
Exactly. There's probably even a photo of him somewhere. I know there's plenty of portraits of him with his fair white skin and fair white hair. But anyway, I digress.
Well, one of the most famous is this one. You see, when the people were brought back from when the Persians overcame the city of Babylon, Cyrus was the top guy. He was the king of Persia, fabulously wealthy. And he made a decree, according to the Bible, that the God of heaven had given him all these kingdoms, and he told the Jews that if they wanted, they could go back to Jerusalem, they could rebuild their temple, rebuild their city, and take their gods with them. And they said, we haven't got any gods. But I'll tell you what we would like. We'd like all the stuff that Nebuchadnezzar nicked out of the temple. And he said, right, you can take that as well. And there's no recession here in Persia. We'll pay some of the costs of travel as well. All that's in the book at the end of Chronicles, books of Ezra, Nehemiah. You'll find it all there. And the critics said, nonsense. Because we know that the ancient kings, almost all of them, like Sargon, took the cream of the population out and brought other people in, but they didn't do the opposite. They didn't tell people you could go home. So that's wrong to start with. Well,
no, it's not. Whoa. No, that's not accurate, because it was the Babylonians who came and took out the Israelites and had them as slaves. And it was the Persians who conquered Babylon. So the Persians weren't at war and had no quarrel with the Israelites. In fact, as far as I'm aware, they had reasonably good relations. So that was... this is really painful to watch. It's so disingenuous.
Well, I'm wondering whether maybe we should knock it on the head soon, because I see he's got how many minutes left to go, and it's same old, isn't it?
Basically, it's all he's doing is he's rather smugly saying, well, these people existed, therefore the Bible. But he's also twisting things to suit his narrative, and I wasn't sure if it was inept or dishonest. I'm thinking it's actually rather dishonest. What he's putting out there, and he's certainly playing to his audience. I mean, this isn't something that's going to go and convert people to Christianity who aren't believers. It's just, I was ready to be converted with his archaeological evidence. As a historian, I'd love to be. I'd love to discover new things. History's wonderful. History's just there's so much you can get out of it. But what he's talking about is he's just talking garbage. He is talking garbage. Just because people existed does not mean that everything in the Bible is correct.
Archaeology is good stuff, but he's abusing archaeology and trying to make it prove his point.
Yes, he's presupposing that the Bible's correct, and then just going, oh, and this backs this up, this backs that up. But what about all the stuff that it doesn't prove? And I'll go back to the city of Tyre. I mean, Tyre is still there today, and I might even I'll stop sharing that, but so I might even just to show people. Let me go to good old Google Earth, and I'll bring it.
I expect what do they call it? The tour TripAdvisor. I expect they will do a tour of Tyre for you.
Absolutely. Well, you can certainly go to Tyre. So if I were to go, let me just share my screen again. Make sure there's nothing that people shouldn't see on the screen. No, we're all safe. Okay, so if we go, so we'll go down to Lebanon here. And I'll just to make it. Oh, there we go. Tyre.
Yeah.
But Ezekiel said it was going to be wiped out.
And water.
Yeah. So what? And well, here's where Ezekiel really messed up. So if you'll see, actually, if you share the screen very quickly. So if you see this is where the original coastline would have been, and there was this city out here. And what they would do in Tyre, whenever the invading armies would come in, they would cross over to this part, which was an island at the time. So the waters didn't wash it away. In fact, they got more land. They reclaimed some land. Yes. So you can zoom in to quite literally here, and I believe these are where are the ruins? Actually, yeah, that would be the here we go, the ancient ruins of Tyre, right in here.
Yeah.
So Ezekiel said that was going to be destroyed and wiped away. So interesting that he didn't mention that in his look at all the evidence and look at all these historical things that have come true. I mean, there's a very obvious one.
Yeah. Well, there you go. He's sorting out his evidence to suit his narrative. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, okay. I think I've probably tired you out with this.
Very good.
But I want to announce that you very kindly agreed to join me in future shows in 2021 on a regular basis with an Ask an Atheist interactive audience participation event.
So it could be fun, it could be scary, it could be interesting.
We've got to fix up a time which is convenient to both of us. I think we said my late Saturday night and your early Sunday morning, didn't we? So that
just so long as it's not too early on a Sunday morning. Yeah. So I'm not always at my brightest and bushy-tailed that early. One of the unfortunate side effects of having young children, they tend to stay up late and wake you up early.
Tell me about it. Yeah, I've only just got back from the school run myself. Okay, Chris, as usual, you have been utterly fantastic. And I'm going to let you go now and have another glass of that lovely red Australian wine, because I know you've been on the water during our show.
Well, I have been, and if I can do a quick shout out, everyone this Christmas, please go and buy a bottle of Australian wine. We've had some, one of our neighbouring countries has decided to put some fairly large tariffs on us because we won't kowtow to them. And it's absolutely crippling our wine industry. So asking all of our friends out there, this Christmas, please go and buy a bottle of Australian wine. And I can promise you, if you buy one bottle, it won't be a last.
Well, I can tell you that I have a sister-in-law, or probably an ex-sister-in-law, because I was divorced from her sister, who studied in, is it Wollongong University?
Wollongong, University of Wollongong, yes.
Yeah, which is not far from where you are, I believe.
No, it takes me about 3-4 minutes to drive there.
Yeah. And she did a
Wait.
PhD on
Excellent.
viticulture. So there you go.
Excellent.
Mm.
See, this is where we study.
So the wine is partially due to her. That's the quality.
You know what? I think I'll go and have a bottle at some point, or maybe a glass. Sorry, not a bottle.
Yeah.
And I'll certainly toast her.
Okay. Well, enjoy that. Yes, Chris. Once again, you've been brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.